The blood-red sun crested over the rugged Arizona mountains, casting long shadows across the parched earth of quartzsite as Katherine Voss collapsed to her knees, miles from anywhere that could be called civilization. Dust coated her torn dress, once a vibrant blue, now stained with dirt and sweat from 3 days of desperate travel through unforgiving terrain. Her supplies had run out yesterday, her canteen now as empty as her hopes of survival. The stagecoach robbery had left her the sole survivor, abandoned in the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing her mother's portrait. Katherine had walked without stopping, guided only by the distant peaks and a determination born of desperation. But now, as the merciless sun climbed higher, her body finally surrendered to exhaustion. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats at first, the sound lost beneath the ringing in her ears. It wasn't until the shadow fell across her that Katherine realized she wasn't alone. Summoning what little strength remained, she tried to rise, legs trembling beneath her like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Her body trembled from exhaustion. The cowboy said, "You don't have to stand. You've already survived." His voice carried the grit of the desert, but held a surprising gentleness. Katherine looked up, squinting against the sunlight that silhouetted the stranger on horseback. He dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, and as he approached, his features became clear. Sun-weathered skin, eyes the color of sage, and a jawline shadowed with several days' stubble. "Name's Dax Irving," he said, kneeling beside her and offering a canteen. "Folks call me Dax." Katherine's parched lips cracked as she accepted the water. "Katherine Voss," she managed after several careful sips. "The stagecoach to Prescott was attacked 3 days ago." Dax's expression darkened. 3 days on foot in this country." He glanced at her torn boots and blistered feet. "Madam, it's a miracle you're breathing." "Not sure how much longer that'll last," Katherine murmured, her vision swimming as exhaustion threatened to pull her under. "That ain't for you to worry about now," Dax said, carefully gathering her into his arms. She felt lighter than she should, he noted with concern as he lifted her onto his horse. "Quartzsite's about 2 hours' ride. My ranch is closer. Got clean water, food, and a spare room where you can rest." Katherine wanted to object, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but survival outweighed social conventions. As Dax mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist, she felt herself leaning into his solid warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carried away by the desert wind. "Save your strength, Miss Voss," he replied, urging the horse forward. "The hard part's over now." But as they rode toward the distant horizon, both knew that some journeys were just beginning. The Irving ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a modest single-story home with a barn and corral, surrounded by scattered mesquite trees offering rare patches of shade. Smoke curled from the stone chimney despite the afternoon heat, and as they approached, Katherine noticed a weathered sign reading Sagebrush Ranch swinging from a post near the gate. "It ain't much," Dax said as they crossed onto his property, "but it's home." Katherine had been drifting in and out of consciousness during the ride, her head occasionally falling back against Dax's shoulder. Each time she stirred, his grip would tighten slightly, steadying her. Now, as the horse slowed to a walk, she forced her eyes open. "It looks beautiful," she said honestly, taking in the simple but well-maintained homestead. An older man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His silver hair glinted in the sunlight as he approached, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "Got company, Hank," Dax called out, bringing the horse to a stop. "Miss Katherine Voss found her out near Coyote Pass, sole survivor of that stage robbery we heard about." Hank's eyes widened. Lord Almighty, get her inside, quick. I'll fetch some water for washing up. Dax dismounted first, then carefully lifted Katherine down. When her legs buckled beneath her, he swept her into his arms without hesitation. "I've got you," he murmured, carrying her toward the house. The interior was simple, but clean: a main room with a fireplace, kitchen area, and solid wooden furniture that showed signs of skilled craftsmanship. Dax brought her to a small bedroom off the main area, laying her gently on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt. "This was my mother's room," he explained, stepping back. "Hank'll bring water. I'll find you something clean to wear, then we'll see about food." Katherine caught his sleeve as he turned to leave. "Who's Hank?" A small smile softened Dax's features. "Henry Jenkins, ranch foreman. Been with my family since before I was born. Practically raised me after my folks passed." "I'm sorry," Katherine said, reading between the lines. "Long time ago," Dax replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide the old pain. "Rest now. You're safe here." After he left, Katherine sank deeper into the first real bed she'd felt in weeks. The room was modest but held personal touches: a vase of dried wildflowers, a bookshelf with well-worn volumes, a rocking chair by the window with a half-finished quilt draped over it. Despite her exhaustion, she fought to stay awake, afraid that if she closed her eyes, she might wake to find this sanctuary had been just another desert mirage. Hank arrived with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a kindly smile that reminded her of her own grandfather. "Miss Voss, you're among friends now," he assured her, setting the basin on a small table. "I'll leave you to freshen up. There'll be food when you're ready." When both men had gone, Katherine slowly peeled off her ruined dress and used the cool water to wash away days of dust and fear. The simple act of cleansing revived her somewhat, and by the time she pulled on the cotton nightgown Dax had left his mother's, she presumed she felt almost human again. The smell of cooking drew her to the door, but her legs still trembled with weakness. She sank onto the edge of the bed, frustrated by her body's betrayal. A gentle knock preceded Dax's voice. "Miss Voss, got some stew here if you're feeling up to eating. Please come in," she called, adjusting the nightgown to ensure modesty. Dax entered bearing a tray with a steaming bowl of stew, a chunk of brown bread, and a cup of coffee. He hesitated, seeing her on the bed, then set the tray on the bedside table. "Thought you might not make it to the table just yet," he said, dragging the rocking chair closer for her. "Need a hand?" Katherine nodded, swallowing her pride. Dax helped her to the chair, his touch respectful and brief. Once she was settled with the tray on her lap, he retreated to the doorway, giving her space while seemingly reluctant to leave her alone. The stew was simple: beef, potatoes, carrots, but to Katherine, it tasted like salvation. She hadn't realized how ravenous she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. "This is wonderful," she said between careful bites, not wanting to make herself ill by eating too quickly. Dax leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Hank's doing. Man can work cattle all day and still cook better than anyone in 3 counties. As she ate, Katherine felt strength gradually returning to her limbs. With it came clarity and questions. "Mr. Irving, Dax," he corrected gently. "Dax," she amended. "I need to get word to Prescott. My uncle is expecting me. After the robbery, he'll think I'm—" Her voice caught. "First light tomorrow, I'll ride into town and send a telegraph," Dax promised. "Tonight, you need rest more than anything." Katherine nodded gratefully, setting aside the now empty bowl. Despite her rest on the ride and the nourishment of the meal, exhaustion still pulled at her like quicksand. Dax seemed to notice, stepping forward to take the tray. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what he'd done. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." Something unreadable flickered in Dax's eyes. No debt between us, Miss Voss. Out here we look after our own. I'm hardly one of your own, she pointed out. A small smile crossed his face. You are now. With that, he left her to rest, closing the door softly behind him. Katherine made her way back to the bed, her mind racing despite her body's fatigue. She'd come west seeking a new beginning after losing her parents to influenza back in Boston. Her uncle's invitation to join him in Prescott had seemed like Providence, a chance to leave grief behind and start fresh in 1885 expanding frontier. Now, as she drifted toward sleep in a stranger's bed, Katherine wondered if fate had different plans for her altogether. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing. Katherine woke feeling remarkably restored, though her body still ached from her ordeal. She found a simple dress laid out for her plain brown cotton, slightly faded but clean and mended with careful stitches. After dressing, she ventured out of the bedroom to find Hank at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. The old foreman turned at her approach, his weathered face breaking into a smile. There she is, looking more like the living than the half-dead, if you don't mind my saying so. He gestured to the table. Sit yourself down, coffee's hot. Katherine obeyed, accepting the steaming mug he offered. Where's Mr. Irving? Dax left for town at first light like he promised. Wanted to get that telegraph sent to your uncle. Hank brought over a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Eat up now. Nothing heals like good food. Katherine hadn't realized how hungry she still was until the plate appeared before her. As she ate, Hank sat across from her, nursing his own coffee. Been with the Irving family going on 30 years, he said conversationally. Saw Dax born, saw him grow, saw him break and remake himself after the war. Katherine paused, fork halfway to her mouth. He fought. Hank nodded, eyes distant with memory. Cavalry. Came back in 65, changed like all the boys did. His pa had passed while he was gone. Ma held on another 5 years before consumption took her. He sighed heavily. Boy was just 23, suddenly alone with a ranch to run and nightmares that kept him walking the floors most nights. How awful, Katherine murmured, feeling a new dimension of respect for her rescuer. He's better now, Hank continued. 10 years does a lot to heal what can be healed. Still, he keeps to himself mostly. Folks in town respect him, but they don't know him, not really. Katherine wondered why Hank was sharing these confidences with her, a stranger. As if reading her thoughts, the old man smiled gently. Not like Dax to bring someone home, he explained. Especially not a woman. Figured you ought to know a bit about the man who saved your life. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Katherine rose instinctively, moving to the window to see Dax dismounting from his horse, another rider beside him. The second man was older, distinguished-looking with a black bag in hand. Brought Doc Wilson back with him, Hank observed. Good thinking. The door opened moments later and Dax entered, removing his hat. His eyes immediately found Katherine and something like relief crossed his features. You're up, he said simply, though the words carried more weight than their simplicity suggested. Yes, she replied, suddenly aware of her borrowed dress and unbound hair. Thank you for the clothes. Dax nodded, then stepped aside to admit a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. This is Dr. Wilson. Thought he should take a look at you, make sure there's no lasting damage from your ordeal. A wise precaution, the doctor agreed, setting his bag on the table. Miss Voss, I understand you were alone in the desert for 3 days. Katherine confirmed this while Dax and Hank retreated outside, giving her privacy for the examination. Dr. Wilson was thorough but respectful, checking her for dehydration, examining her blistered feet, and asking detailed questions about her experience. "You're remarkably resilient, young lady," he pronounced after completing his examination. "With continued rest and proper nutrition, you should make a full recovery. Those feet will need time to heal, though. No long walks for at least a week." When the men returned, the doctor shared his findings and recommendations. "She needs time to recover her strength before attempting any further travel," he concluded. "At least a week, possibly 2. Dax nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "She's welcome here as long as needed. I sent the telegraph to your uncle," he added, turning to Katherine. "Explained what happened and that you're recovering here. Left my name and location if he wants to come collect you." "Thank you," Katherine said, touched by his thoroughness. "Did you learn anything about the robbery where the bandits caught?" A shadow crossed Dax's face. "Not yet. Sheriff's got a posse out looking. 4 passengers dead, driver 2. They're calling it the work of the Vasquez gang." Katherine's knees weakened, and she sank into a chair as the reality of how close she'd come to death washed over her anew. "I only survived because I was thrown from the coach when the horses bolted," she whispered. "I was knocked unconscious. When I came to, the bandits were gone. So were all the valuables." Dr. Wilson placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Best not to dwell on it just now, Miss Voss. Focus on recovery." After the doctor departed with a list of instructions for her care, Dax approached Katherine with a somewhat hesitant air. "If you're feeling up to it, thought you might like to sit outside a while," he suggested. "Fresh air does wonders." Katherine readily agreed, and soon found herself settled in a wooden chair on the covered porch, a quilt tucked around her despite the warm day. From this vantage point, she could observe the workings of the ranch Hank and another man, younger and apparently a hired hand, working with horses in the corral, chickens pecking in the yard, the distant shapes of cattle grazing on the scrubby land. Dax joined her after a while, bringing a pitcher of water and 2 glasses. He sat in the adjacent chair, stretching his long legs out before him. "Never asked what brings you to Arizona territory," he said, pouring water for them both. Katherine accepted the glass gratefully. "My uncle, Edmund Voss, he's a banker in Prescott, came west 5 years ago. After my parents died last winter, he invited me to join him." She took a sip of water. "I was a school teacher in Boston, but there wasn't much left for me there." Dax nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fresh starts." "The West is good for those. And you?" she asked. "Have you always been here, born on this land?" he confirmed. "Pa built this house with his own hands year before I came along." 1861, making you 24, Katherine calculated. A small smile touched his lips. "You teach arithmetic too?" 24 it is. "I'm 22, she offered in return, "though sometimes I feel much older." "Grief does that," he observed quietly. They fell into companionable silence, watching the day unfold around them. It struck Katherine how comfortable she felt in this man's presence, despite knowing him less than a day. Perhaps it was the circumstances of their meeting him literally saving her life, or perhaps it was something more fundamental, a recognition of kindred spirits. "Your uncle," Dax said suddenly. "He'll likely come for you once he gets the telegram. Prescott's only 2 days' ride." Katherine nodded, though the prospect stirred unexpected reluctance. "Yes, I imagine he will. You'll be better off there," Dax continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Proper town, society. Opportunities for a lady of education." "Are you eager to be rid of me, Mr. Irving?" she asked, only half joking. His eyes, when they met hers, were startlingly intense. "No, Miss Voss, I am not." The admission hung between them, simple but laden with meaning neither was ready to examine. "Well then," Katherine said softly, "perhaps we should make the most of however long I'm to be here." Dax's responding smile transformed his serious face, revealing a glimpse of the young man beneath the weathered exterior. Perhaps we should. 5 days passed in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural to Katherine. Each morning, she woke to the sounds of the ranch roosters crowing, horses nickering, men's voices calling to one another as they began their day's work. She joined Hank for breakfast, often helping as her strength returned, then spend her mornings reading from Dax's modest library or sitting on the porch, watching the activities of the ranch unfold before her. Dax was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each day to sit with her, sometimes sharing stories of the area, sometimes simply providing quiet companionship. In the evenings, after supper, the three of them would gather in the main room. Occasionally, Dax would read aloud from one of his books. He had a particular fondness for Twain and Dickens. Other times, Katherine would share tales of Boston and her life before coming west. Her feet were healing well, the blisters forming new skin, though they remained tender. By the 5th day, she was able to walk around the house unaided and even ventured as far as the garden with Dax's steadying arm to guide her. It was on this 5th evening that everything changed. Supper had been cleared away, and Hank had retired to his quarters in the barn, claiming an early morning ahead. Katherine sat at the table, mending one of Dax's shirts, an activity she'd insisted upon as a small way to repay his kindness. Dax himself sat nearby, cleaning his revolver with practiced motions, the lamplight catching in his hair and illuminating the concentration on his face. The domesticity of the scene struck Katherine suddenly. It felt right in a way that surprised her, as though they'd been sharing this space, these small moments, for years rather than days. "Penny for your thoughts," Dax said, glancing up to find her watching him. Katherine smiled, returning her attention to her stitches. "I was just thinking how strange life can be. A week ago, I was on a stagecoach heading for a new life with my uncle, a man I barely know. Now I'm sitting here, mending shirts and feeling more at home than I have since my parents died." Dax set down his revolver, giving her his full attention. "Does that trouble you?" "It should," she admitted. "By all proper standards it should. We're practically strangers." "Are we?" His question was gentle but direct. "Feels to me like I know more about you than folks I've known for years." Katherine considered this. They had talked more in these 5 days than she had with anyone in months. Something about Dax invited confidences, perhaps his quiet attention, the sense that he truly listened rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. "I suppose you're right," she conceded. "Still, it's all rather unorthodox." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Not much about this situation has been orthodox from the start, Miss Voss." "Katherine," she corrected, making a decision in that moment. "If we're not strangers, then perhaps you should use my given name." His eyes, warm in the lamplight, held hers. "Katherine," he said, testing the name. "It suits you." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Dax was on his feet instantly, the cleaned revolver in his hand as he moved to the window. "Stay inside," he ordered, his entire demeanor shifting to alertness. "Could be nothing, but it's after dark, and unexpected visitors rarely bring good news," Katherine finished, setting aside her mending. Dax gave her an approving nod before stepping outside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Katherine moved closer, listening as hoofbeats slowed and multiple horses came to a stop in the yard. "Evening, gentlemen," she heard Dax call, his voice carrying the relaxed authority of a man on his own property. "Something I can help you with, Mr. Irving." A new voice, deeper, with the faintest hint of an Eastern accent. "Edmund Voss, I understand you've been sheltering my niece." Katherine's heart leapt to her throat. Her uncle. She hadn't expected him so soon. Moving to the door, she pushed it open wider, stepping onto the porch despite Dax's instruction to remain inside. In the yard, illuminated by the porch lamp and moonlight, sat 3 riders. The one in front, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, dismounted with the stiffness of someone unused to long hours in the saddle. Behind him, 2 younger men remained mounted hired guards, Katherine presumed, for the journey from Prescott. "Uncle Edmund," she called, stepping forward. The older man's face broke into a relieved smile. "Katherine, thank God." He strode forward, mounting the porch steps with purpose. "When we heard about the stage robbery, I feared the worst. Then Mr. Irving's telegram arrived." He reached for her hands, clasping them tightly. "My dear girl, what an ordeal you've endured." Katherine allowed herself to be embraced, though she found herself glancing over her uncle's shoulder at Dax, who stood watching with an unreadable expression. "Mr. Irving saved my life," she said, stepping back from her uncle's embrace. "I was nearly dead from exposure when he found me." Edmund Voss turned to Dax, extending his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay, sir. You have my eternal gratitude." Dax accepted the handshake, his posture relaxing slightly now that he knew the visitors posed no threat. "No debt necessary, Mr. Voss. Anyone would have done the same." "I rather doubt that," Edmund replied. "Nevertheless, I insist you accept compensation for your trouble and hospitality." Something hardened in Dax's eyes. "That won't be necessary." An awkward silence fell, broken when Katherine spoke. "Uncle, you must be exhausted from your journey. Won't you come inside? I'm sure we can offer some refreshment before you retire." Edmund hesitated, glancing back at his men. "We actually plan to return to town tonight. I've taken rooms at the Quartzsite Hotel. I thought, well, I assumed you'd want to come with me immediately." The assumption caught Katherine off guard. Of course, she should go with her uncle. It was why she'd come west in the first place. Yet the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Dax, created an unexpected ache in her chest. The doctor recommended at least a week of rest before travel," she said, grasping at the medical advice as a reprieve. "It's only been 5 days." Dax stepped forward. "Your niece was in bad shape when I found her, Mr. Voss. Doc Wilson was quite clear about her needing time to heal properly." Edmund frowned, looking between them. "I see. Well, perhaps it would be best if I stayed here tonight then. We can discuss the matter further in the morning when we're all rested." He turned to his men. "Return to town and inform Mrs. Henderson at the hotel that I'll not be needing the rooms tonight after all." As one of the men rode off to deliver the message, the other dismounted to help with the horses. Dax offered to show them to the barn, leaving Katherine and her uncle alone on the porch. "You look well, considering what you've been through," Edmund observed, studying her face in the lamplight. "I'm relieved to find you in such good hands." Katherine nodded, unsure how to express the complex emotions swirling within her. "Mr. Irving Dax has been very kind." Her uncle raised an eyebrow at the familiar use of the rancher's name but made no comment. Instead, he patted her hand. "We'll sort everything out tomorrow. For now, I'm simply grateful you're alive." Later, after her uncle had been fed and settled in the small room Hank typically used when bad weather prevented him from reaching his quarters in the barn, Katherine found herself once again on the porch. She couldn't sleep, her mind too full of conflicting thoughts. The soft creak of the door announced Dax's presence before he spoke. "Thought you might still be awake," he said, joining her at the porch rail. "Lot to think about, I expect." Katherine nodded, gazing out at the silver-washed landscape. The moon hung full and bright, illuminating the desert in ghostly light. "My uncle wants to leave tomorrow. Take me to Prescott as planned." Dax was silent for a long moment. "That what you want?" "It's why I came west," she said, though it wasn't really an answer. "Not what I asked," he pointed out gently. Katherine turned to face him, finding his eyes in the moonlight. "I don't know what I want anymore. A week ago, the answer would have been simple. Now—" She trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the change in her. Dax stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. "Katherine," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips, "I've no right to ask you to stay. Got nothing to offer a woman like you. This ranch barely turns a profit most years. Life out here is hard, unforgiving." "Yet you love it," she observed. "It's in my blood," he acknowledged. "But you're educated, refined, meant for better things than a rancher's wife." The words hung between them, the first acknowledgement of what had been building between them these past days. "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Katherine asked softly. Dax's hand rose, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," she countered. "I know you're honorable, kind. I know you work harder than any man I've ever met. I know when you read Dickens aloud, you give each character a different voice." She smiled at the memory. "I know when you think no one's looking, you slip table scraps to that mangy cat that lives in the barn." A surprised laugh escaped him. "Been watching me close, haven't you?" "Yes," she admitted simply. "Just as you've been watching me." The truth of it settled between them, undeniable. Dax's hand cupped her cheek fully now, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "Your uncle won't approve," he warned, even as he leaned closer. "Probably not," she agreed, tilting her face up to his. When his lips finally met hers, Katherine felt as though something long missing had clicked into place. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into it, her hands finding purchase on his shirt front. When they separated, Dax rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "Been wanting to do that since the second day," he confessed. Katherine smiled against his lips. "What took you so long?" His answering laugh warmed her heart. But the moment of joy was tempered by reality as he straightened, his expression growing serious once more. "Your uncle leaves tomorrow. Means you've got a choice to make." Katherine nodded, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "I know." Dax stepped back, creating space between them, though it clearly cost him to do so. "I won't stand in the way of what's best for you. If that's Prescott and the life your uncle can offer, I'll understand." "And if I choose differently?" she asked. His eyes, intense in the moonlight, held hers. "Then I'll be the happiest man in the Arizona Territory." With that, he brushed his lips against her forehead and retreated into the house, leaving Katherine alone with her thoughts and the desert night. Morning brought no easy answers. Katherine rose early, dressing in the now familiar borrowed dress, and made her way to the kitchen to find Hank already preparing breakfast. The old foreman gave her a knowing look, but said nothing, merely handing her a cup of coffee. Edmund emerged not long after, looking somewhat rumpled from his night in unfamiliar surroundings but cordial as he accepted his own coffee. Dax was conspicuously absent, having left at dawn, according to Hank, to check on a section of fence in the north pasture. Over breakfast, Edmund outlined his plans. "We'll leave for Prescott by mid-morning if that suits you," he told Katherine. "I've arranged everything in town, a position at the Ladies' Academy if you wish to continue teaching, a comfortable room in my home, introductions to the finest families in the area." Katherine listened, trying to envision the life he described. It was, objectively, an excellent opportunity: security, respectability, a chance to rebuild after loss. "It's very generous," she said carefully. "I'm grateful for your kindness, Uncle." Edmund smiled, interpreting her words as acceptance. "Excellent. I'll see about securing a wagon for the journey. Your feet are still healing and the roads can be rough in places." He excused himself to make arrangements, leaving Katherine with Hank, who watched her with shrewd eyes. "Not sure that sounded like a yes to me," the old man observed, refilling her coffee cup. Katherine sighed, cradling the warm mug between her hands. "I don't know what to do, Hank. My uncle offers security, a respectable life. It's what I came west for." "But," Hank prompted. "But in less than a week, this place, these people have come to mean more to me than I thought possible." She met the foreman's gaze directly. "Is that foolish? To consider turning away from certainty for something that might not even work?" Hank leaned back in his chair, considering her question seriously. "Known Dax Irving his whole life. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I've seen you come alive these past days." He shrugged. "Can't tell you what to choose, Miss Katherine. But I will say this security's a fine thing, but it ain't worth much if your heart's elsewhere." Before Katherine could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Dax's return. Through the window, she watched him dismount, exchange words with her uncle in the yard, then stride toward the house, his expression unreadable. When he entered, his eyes immediately found hers, searching for answers she hadn't yet formulated. "Your uncle says you'll be leaving today," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Katherine hesitated, aware of Hank quietly excusing himself to give them privacy. "He wants to leave by mid-morning." Dax nodded once, jaw tight. "I see." "I haven't given him my answer yet," she added quickly. Hope and wariness battled in his eyes. "And what will that answer be?" Katherine rose from her chair, closing the distance between them. "That depends," she said softly. "On what?" "On whether a certain rancher with too much pride and not enough sense is willing to ask me to stay." Something shifted in Dax's expression, tension giving way to determination. He closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. "Stay," he said simply. "Not just for now. Stay for good. I know it's fast, know it's not what a proper courtship looks like. But there's something between us, Katherine. Something real." Katherine's heart thundered in her chest. "There would be talk. People would say you married me out of pity or that I trapped you out of gratitude." "Let them talk," Dax replied fiercely. "We'll know the truth." "Which is?" she prompted. His hands tightened around hers. "That I'm falling in love with you. That I want to build a life with you, right here on this land." The words, spoken plainly and without artifice, broke through Katherine's last hesitations. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, feeling as though she were stepping off a cliff and finding wings instead of the expected fall. Dax's smile was like the sunrise, transforming his entire face. He pulled her close, his kiss no longer hesitant but confident, claiming. When they separated, both breathless, the sound of a throat clearing reminded them they weren't alone. Edmund Voss stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and disapproval. "Katherine," he said stiffly, "I've arranged for a wagon. We should be able to leave within the hour." Katherine straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from Dax's solid presence beside her. "Uncle Edmund, I'm very grateful for your offer and your concern for my welfare, but I won't be going to Prescott with you." Her uncle's eyebrows shot up. "I beg your pardon." "I'm staying here," she said, her voice growing more confident. "With Mr. Irving." Edmund's gaze shifted to Dax, hardening. "I see. And what exactly are your intentions toward my niece, Mr. Irving?" "Honorable ones," Dax replied without hesitation. "I intend to marry her with your blessing or without it, though I'd prefer the former." The blunt declaration left Edmund momentarily speechless. He recovered quickly, his banker's composure reasserting itself. "This is absurd. Katherine, you barely know this man. Whatever feelings you believe you have developed during this extraordinary situation," cannot be the basis for a lifelong commitment. With respect, Mr. Voss, Dax interjected. Sometimes extraordinary situations reveal truths that might take months or years to discover otherwise. And what truth has been revealed here? Edmund demanded. That my niece, still recovering from the trauma of losing her parents and nearly dying herself, is vulnerable to the first man who shows her kindness. The accusation stung, but Katherine refused to be cowed. I am not some helpless child unable to know her own mind, Uncle. I came west seeking a new beginning. I found it just not where I expected. Edmund's expression softened slightly. Katherine, I promised your father I would look after you. How can I fulfill that promise if you're living on an isolated ranch with a man you've known less than a week? By trusting me, she replied simply. By believing that I know what will make me happy. A tense silence stretched between them, broken when Hank reappeared, looking somewhat apologetic for interrupting. Pardon the intrusion, the foreman said, but there's a rider coming. Looks to be Sheriff Collins. The news diverted their attention momentarily. All four moved to the porch to watch the approach of a dust-covered rider wearing a tin star on his vest. Irving, the sheriff called in greeting as he dismounted. Miss Voss, he nodded to Katherine, then to Edmund. Mr. Voss, didn't expect to find you here, but it saves me a trip to Prescott. What brings you out this way, Sheriff? Dax asked, tension evident in his stance. Sheriff Collins removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. Got news you'll all want to hear. We caught the Vasquez gang yesterday, holed up in an abandoned mine near the Mexico border. Katherine gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. All of them, all 5, the sheriff confirmed. And here's the thing, they had valuables from the stage robbery still in their possession, including this. He reached into his pocket, producing a small, ornate locket. Found your name inscribed inside, Miss Voss. Thought you might want it back. With trembling fingers, Katherine accepted the locket, her mother's final gift to her, the one possession she'd truly mourned losing. Thank you, she whispered, clutching it tightly. There's more, the sheriff continued. When we confronted them with the evidence, they started talking, trying to bargain for leniency. Turns out the stage robbery wasn't their first crime. He turned to Edmund. Mr. Voss, does the name Thomas Crawford mean anything to you? Edmund frowned. He's the bank manager at my Prescott branch. Why? Because according to Vasquez, Crawford hired them to rob that particular stage, the sheriff said grimly. Wanted to make sure certain papers never reached you in Prescott, something about fraudulent loans he'd been approving. Edmund paled visibly. Good God, Crawford's been handling millions in mining investments if he's been engaging in fraud. You might want to get back to Prescott sooner rather than later, Sheriff Collins advised. Your bank could be in serious trouble. The revelation changed everything. Edmund's face reflected shock, then determination as the banker in him took over. I must return immediately, he muttered, almost to himself. Then, seeming to remember the previous conversation, he turned to Katherine. I'm afraid this changes things. I'll be consumed with this crisis for the foreseeable future. I won't be able to provide the support I promised. Katherine moved to her uncle's side, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Don't worry about me. Focus on saving the bank. Edmund studied her face, then glanced at Dax, who stood nearby, respectfully silent during this family moment. Something in the older man's expression shifted, resignation giving way to a reluctant understanding. You truly wish to stay here? He asked Katherine quietly. She nodded, certainty filling her. I do. Edmund sighed heavily. Your father would have my head. A pause then, but I believe he would also want your happiness above all. Hope blossomed in Katherine's chest. Does that mean you give us your blessing? It means, Edmund replied carefully, that I will not stand in your way. But," he added, turning to fix Dax with a stern gaze, "I expect you to make an honest woman of her without delay, Mr. Irving, and I will be checking in regularly to ensure her welfare." Dax stepped forward, extending his hand to the older man. "You have my word, sir. I'll spend my life making sure she never regrets her choice." As the men shook hands, sealing the impromptu agreement, Katherine felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The path ahead might not be what she'd envisioned when boarding that stagecoach, but somehow it felt right, as if all the trials and losses had led her precisely where she needed to be. Within the hour, Edmund and Sheriff Collins had departed her uncle to deal with the banking crisis in Prescott, the sheriff to return to town with news of the captured bandits. Katherine stood on the porch long after they'd disappeared from sight, the recovered locket warm in her palm. Dax joined her, his arm slipping around her waist with a newfound familiarity that sent warmth spreading through her. "No regrets?" he asked softly. Katherine turned to face him, the man who had found her when she was lost in more ways than one. "None," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. As they kissed, bathed in the golden light of the Arizona morning, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that her body might have trembled from exhaustion when Dax first found her. But her heart had never been stronger than it was now, filled with love for the cowboy who had seen her strength even in her weakest moment. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Word of the engagement between the Boston schoolteacher and the taciturn rancher spread quickly through Quartzsite, generating both goodwill and inevitable gossip. Katherine found she cared little for the latter, too consumed with happiness and preparations for their future together to worry about wagging tongues. Dax, true to his promise to Edmund, arranged for the minister from town to perform a simple ceremony at the ranch. They would be married before the month was out, a timeline that would have scandalized Boston society, but seemed perfectly reasonable in the pragmatic atmosphere of the frontier. In the meantime, Katherine threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life. Hank proved an invaluable teacher, showing her how to manage the household accounts, preserve food for the winter months, and even, to her delight, how to ride. "Can't be a rancher's wife and afraid of horses," the old foreman had declared, leading her to the corral where a gentle mare named Maple waited patiently. Katherine's first attempts at riding had been awkward, her still healing feet making mounting difficult, but she persevered with characteristic determination. By the end of the second week, she was riding confidently around the property, sometimes accompanying Dax on his less strenuous daily tasks. These rides together became precious moments, opportunities to talk and learn each other's histories more deeply. Katherine shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of her parents' loving but strict household, of the teaching position she had cherished before illness swept through the city. Dax, initially more reticent, gradually opened up about his own past, his father's dreams for the ranch, his mother's gentle influence, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war that still occasionally haunted his dreams. "The night we met," he confessed during one such ride as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring, "I was out riding because of the nightmares. Some nights they're worse than others." He looked away, embarrassed by the admission. "Needed air space. Needed to remind myself the war's long over." Katherine reached across the space between their horses, taking his hand. "I'm glad you couldn't sleep that night," she said softly. "Otherwise, you might never have found me." His fingers tightened around hers. "Sometimes I think it was you who found me." The comment, uncharacteristically poetic from the practical rancher, touched Katherine deeply. She was learning that beneath Dax's stoic exterior beat a sensitive heart, one that felt things deeply even if he struggled to express them in words. As their wedding day approached, Katherine received a trunk delivered from Prescott, accompanied by a letter from her uncle. Edmund, still embroiled in the banking scandal but making progress in salvaging the institution, had arranged for her personal belongings to be forwarded from Boston. The trunk contained treasures Katherine had thought lost forever: books, photographs, a few cherished pieces of jewelry, and most importantly, her mother's wedding dress, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. "It's beautiful," Hank commented when she showed it to him. The ivory silk and delicate lace a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings of the ranch house. "You'll be the most elegant bride Quartzsite has ever seen." Katherine laughed, carefully repacking the gown. "Probably the only bride Quartzsite has seen who arrived half dead and married before the month was out." "Got a point there," the foreman agreed with a chuckle. The night before the wedding, Katherine sat on the porch swing Dax had installed as a surprise gift, watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues. The past weeks had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her skin sun-kissed, her hands slightly roughened from work, her spirit more resilient than ever. The sound of boots on the porch boards announced Dax's approach. He settled beside her on the swing, his presence a comforting warmth in the cooling evening air. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking as he took in her contemplative expression. Katherine shook her head, leaning against his shoulder. "Just thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. A month ago, I didn't know you existed." Dax's arm circled her shoulders, pulling her closer. "And now I can't imagine my life without you in it," she said simply. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his usual restraint softened by the intimacy of the moment. "Your uncle's arriving tomorrow morning," he reminded her. "Hank rode into town to confirm the arrangements." Katherine nodded, grateful that Edmund had managed to extract himself from the banking crisis long enough to attend the ceremony. Despite their disagreement over her choice, he remained her only family, and his presence meant more than she had expected. "Nervous?" Dax asked after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. Katherine considered the question honestly. "Not about marrying you," she answered, "but about being a rancher's wife. Sometimes, I still have so much to learn." "We've got time," he assured her. "Whole lifetime ahead of us." The promise in those words warmed her more than any fire could have. They sat together as darkness fell, speaking occasionally but mostly content in the shared silence, until Hank's return prompted them to retire Katherine to what had become her room, Dax to the small cabin behind the main house where he'd been sleeping since their engagement, a concession to propriety that had amused practical Hank, but which both had agreed was important. Tomorrow, Katherine thought as she prepared for bed, everything would change again. But unlike the changes that had been thrust upon her by tragedy and circumstance, this one she chose freely, with a heart full of love and hope for the future. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the September air crisp with the first hints of autumn. Katherine stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Her mother's wedding dress fit perfectly, the ivory silk complementing her sun-touched complexion. She had arranged her hair in a simple style, adorned only with wildflowers Hank had gathered at dawn. A knock at the door announced Edmund's arrival. Her uncle entered, dressed in his finest suit, his expression softening at the sight of her. "You look just like your mother," he said, voice thick with emotion. "She would be so proud of you, Katherine." Tears threatened, but Katherine blinked them back, not wanting to spoil the careful preparations. "Thank you for coming, Uncle Edmund. It means everything to have you here." Edmund crossed the room to take her hands in his. "I've had my reservations about this match," he admitted candidly, "but seeing you now, so radiant, perhaps there is wisdom in following one's heart after all." He offered his arm, which she took gratefully. "The minister has arrived, and your Mr. Irving looks about ready to wear a path in the floorboards with his pacing. Shall we put him out of his misery?" Katherine laughed, the sound bright with happiness. "Yes, I believe we shall." They exited the bedroom to find the main room transformed. Hank and the ranch hand, Tom, had moved furniture to create a small space for the ceremony. Wildflowers adorned every surface, their vibrant colors a celebration of life in the desert. A dozen or so guests' neighbors, the doctor, the sheriff and his wife stood in a loose semicircle, turning to watch as Katherine entered on her uncle's arm, but Katherine saw none of them. Her eyes found Dax immediately, standing tall and impossibly handsome in a black suit that looked newly purchased for the occasion. His face, when he saw her, transformed with such naked adoration that her heart skipped a beat. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dax's kiss was tender, restrained by the presence of guests, but full of promise for later. The celebration that followed was modest by Eastern standards, but festive nonetheless. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by neighboring women who had taken Katherine under their collective wing. Music came from a fiddle played by Tom, who revealed a surprising talent, and wine flowed freely. A special order Dax had arranged from a merchant in Prescott. As afternoon mellowed into evening, Katherine found herself momentarily alone, watching her new husband deep in conversation with her uncle. The two men, so different in background and temperament, seemed to have found common ground, their discussion animated but cordial. "You done good, Miss Katherine," Hank said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one, raising his own in a toast. "To new beginnings." She clinked her glass against his. "And to faithful friends who make them possible." The old foreman flushed with pleasure at the tribute. "Been worried about that boy for years," he confided, nodding toward Dax. "Too much alone time ain't good for a man's soul." Needed someone to remind him there's more to life than work and duty. Katherine followed his gaze, warmth spreading through her at the sight of her husband, the words still new and wonderful in her mind. "He's reminded me of a few things too," she said softly. "Like how strength comes in many forms, and sometimes survival isn't enough, you need to live too." Hank nodded sagely. "Reckon you two were meant to find each other then." As twilight deepened, the guests gradually departed with good wishes and knowing smiles. Edmund was the last to leave, boarding a wagon that would take him back to Quartzsite, where he would catch the morning stage to Prescott. "I've settled a small sum in your name at the bank," he told Katherine as they said their goodbyes. "Consider it a wedding present insurance against hard times." Katherine started to protest, but Edmund raised a hand to silence her. "It's done, and I expect regular letters, young lady. Your father would haunt me if I didn't keep a proper eye on you." "Thank you," she said, embracing him warmly, "for everything." As the wagon disappeared down the road, Katherine felt Dax's presence behind her, his hand settling on her shoulders. "Alone at last, Mrs. Irving," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. She turned in his arms, heart quickening at the intensity in his eyes. "So we are." They moved together into the house, their home now, truly and completely. The main room still bore evidence of the celebration, but neither paid it any mind as Dax led her toward what had been his parents' room, now prepared for them with fresh linens and more wildflowers. Later, much later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Katherine rested her head on Dax's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Happy?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "More than I knew possible," she answered truthfully. His arms tightened around her. "Got plans for this place," he said, voice drowsy but eager. "Thinking of expanding the herd next spring, maybe adding some new breeding stock. With the railroad coming closer each year, beef prices are rising." Katherine smiled against his skin, charmed by his practical mind returning to ranch business even in this intimate moment. "We should consider a school as well," she suggested. "Quartzsite has enough children now, and they're riding too far for proper education." Dax's chest rumbled with a chuckle. "Already planning to put that teaching experience to work, are you?" "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "Not right away, but eventually. This community has given me so much. I'd like to give something back." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Whatever you want to do, I'll support it." This partnership goes both ways. The word partnership resonated deeply with Katherine. Not merely a marriage, but a true joining of lives, goals, dreams. She had come west seeking a new beginning. What she'd found was a new life entirely, one richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the ranch house like a protective cloak. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the first night of many in a life built together, step by step, day by day, on love and respect, and the shared understanding that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to exactly where you're meant to be. 3 years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, calving seasons, cattle drives, summer heat, and winter rains. The Sagebrush Ranch prospered under Dax and Katherine's combined efforts. His practical knowledge of ranching paired with her head for figures and organization proved a formidable combination. They expanded the herd, improved the breeding stock, and even added a small orchard that Katherine tended with particular pride. The school Katherine had envisioned became reality in the second year of their marriage. She taught 3 days a week in a small building erected by community effort on the edge of Quartzsite. The remaining days were devoted to ranch work and, increasingly, to caring for their growing family. Their first child, a son they named James after Dax's father, arrived 10 months after their wedding, a sturdy, good-natured baby with his father's sage green eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Katherine had worried about becoming a mother so soon, but from the moment James was placed in her arms, a fierce love unlike anything she'd known before filled her heart. Dax proved to be a devoted father, often carrying the baby with him as he worked around the ranch, pointing out cattle and horses, plants and wildlife, as though the infant could understand every word. Katherine would watch them together, her heart so full it sometimes felt it might overflow. When James was 2, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Katherine's mother. Where James was easygoing, Elizabeth was spirited from her first breath, a tiny force of nature with a shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire household. On a crisp autumn morning in their 3rd year of marriage, Katherine stood on the porch, watching Dax teach 3-year-old James how to brush down Maple, the gentle mare now serving as the boy's introduction to horsemanship. Elizabeth, just turned 1, balanced on Katherine's hip, babbling excitedly at the sight of her father and brother. "Careful now," Dax instructed, his hands guiding James's smaller ones. "Long strokes, remember, Maple likes it best that way." The boy nodded solemnly, his face a picture of concentration as he applied the brush with exaggerated care. Maple, patient as ever, stood perfectly still, occasionally turning her head to nuzzle the child affectionately. "Doing good, son," Dax praised, ruffling James's hair. Looking up, he caught sight of Katherine and Elizabeth watching. A slow smile spread across his face, the same smile that still made Katherine's heart skip, even after 3 years of marriage. "Came to see if my men want some lemonade," Katherine called. "Hank just made a fresh batch." "What do you think, James? Ready for a break?" Dax asked. The boy considered the question with adorable seriousness. "Can I ride Maple after lemonade? Just around the corral," Dax agreed, "with me leading her." Satisfied with this compromise, James carefully set down the brush and raced toward the porch, his small boots kicking up dust. "Mama, I brushed Maple all by myself, I saw," Katherine said, bending awkwardly with Elizabeth still on her hip to receive her son's enthusiastic hug. "You're becoming quite the horseman." "Like Papa," James declared proudly. "Just like Papa," Katherine agreed, meeting Dax's eyes over their son's head, after lemonade served by a slightly more grizzled but no less spry Hank. Dax kept his promise to James about the ride. Katherine sat on the porch swing with Elizabeth, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, watching as her husband led the mare in slow circles, one hand on the reins, the other securely holding their son in the saddle. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hank commented, settling into the chair beside the swing. Dax Irving, feared by most cowboys and respected by all, completely wrapped around the finger of a 3-year-old. Katherine laughed softly, careful not to wake Elizabeth. "He's a wonderful father." "And a lucky man," Hank added with a pointed look at her. She smiled, unable to disagree. The life they had built together was not without challenges. Droughts threatened the cattle. Winters could be harsh, and the isolation sometimes weighed heavily, but it was rich with love, purpose, and the profound satisfaction of creating something meaningful together. As if reading her thoughts, Hank said, "Got a letter from your uncle yesterday when I was in town. Meant to tell you earlier, but we got busy with that broken fence." Katherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. Edmund wrote regularly, but his letters usually came addressed to her directly. "Oh. Asked me some questions about how you were really doing," Hank explained, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Think he still ain't entirely convinced his niece belongs on a cattle ranch." "And what did you tell him?" Katherine asked, curious. Hank's weathered face creased in a smile. "Told him the truth, that you're thriving, that those children of yours are growing strong and healthy, that you and Dax together have made this place better than it ever was." He paused. "Also mentioned you're teaching half the children in the county to read and write, and that folks around here respect you more than just about anyone." Touched by the foreman's assessment, Katherine reached over to squeeze his hand. "Thank you, Hank. Uncle Edmund means well, but I think he still expects me to regret my choice someday." "Some folks can't understand choosing love over comfort," Hank observed sagely. "Their loss." In the corral, James's delighted laughter rang out as Dax pretended the mare was going faster than her actual sedate pace. The sound warmed Katherine's heart, a tangible reminder of all she had gained in choosing this life. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the day's work complete, Katherine and Dax sat together on the porch as had become their custom. The desert stars glittered overhead, a dazzling display impossible to see in city skies. "Hank mentioned Uncle Edmund wrote to him," Katherine said, breaking a comfortable silence. Dax's arm, draped around her shoulders, tightened slightly. "Still checking up on you, on all of us," she corrected gently. "He cares in his way." Dax nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. Over the years, Edmund had become, if not enthusiastic about their marriage, at least accepting of it. He sent generous gifts for the children's birthdays and had even visited once, shortly after James's birth. "Been thinking," Dax said after another stretch of silence. "Maybe we should visit Prescott come spring. Show your uncle how well those kids are turning out. Might set his mind at ease once and for all. The suggestion surprised Katherine. Dax rarely left the ranch for more than a day or two, and never without necessity. You do that, for you. Of course. His voice held no hesitation. Besides, James is old enough now to remember the trip. Be good for him to see more of the world than just quartzsite. Katherine leaned into his embrace, moved by the thoughtfulness behind the offer. I'd like that, thank you. They sat together a while longer, discussing practical matters: which bulls to keep for breeding, whether to expand the vegetable garden, how the new hired hand was working out. Eventually, the conversation drifted to memories, as it often did in these quiet moments together. You know what I was thinking about today? Dax asked, his voice taking on the softer quality it had when he spoke of personal things. What's that? The day I found you. How close I came to riding a different route. How easily I might have missed you entirely. Katherine shivered slightly at the thought. But you didn't miss me. No, he agreed, turning to meet her gaze in the starlight. Luckiest day of my life, finding you half dead in the desert. She laughed at the unromantic but truthful description. Mine too, though I wouldn't have described it that way at the time. Dax's expression grew serious. When I saw you trying to stand, even after everything you'd been through, knew right then you were something special. Strength like that doesn't come along often. I was terrified, Katherine admitted. But then you said, you don't have to stand. You've already survived, he finished, remembering his own words. Didn't know then I was talking to my future wife. Didn't know I was looking at my future husband, she countered. Life takes unexpected turns. Dax pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Grateful for this particular turn every day. As they sat together under the vast canopy of stars, the ranch quiet around them, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate woman trembling with exhaustion in the desert, to the confident rancher's wife, teacher, and mother she had become, it was a transformation as profound as it was unexpected. The stagecoach robbery that had nearly claimed her life had instead set her on a path to the greatest happiness she had ever known. Sometimes survival wasn't the end of the story, but merely its beginning, a chance to discover strengths you never knew you possessed, and to build a life richer than any you could have imagined. Her body had trembled from exhaustion that day, but her spirit had remained unbroken. And in recognizing that strength, Dax Irving had seen not just who she was, but who they could be together. As if reading her thoughts, Dax squeezed her hand gently. Ready to head in? Dawn comes early, Katherine nodded, rising with him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and Joy's children to tend, classes to teach, ranch work to complete. But they would face it as they had faced every day since finding each other. Together, partners in the truest sense of the word, building their life one day at a time under the vast Arizona sky. Hand in hand, they walked into their home, leaving the porch swing gently swaying in the desert night.